Assalamualaikum everybody, and welcome to the webinar hosted by IPRI. Our title for today is very cognizant of the situation around the world that is prevailing, especially in the global south. It is the eradication of poverty, and this is a celebratory UN Day that is annually celebrated on 17th of October. And in line with this, we have a panel of experts from various organizations who will divulge into an insightful discussion. But before that, there's just a little bit about poverty and the eradication of poverty that I could share with you. The point of this day and the fact that this exists on the UN calendar and a reminder of why we need to pay attention to issues such as poverty is to establish an unwavering commitment of the international community to eliminate poverty in all its forms and dimensions. Let's also not forget that it is one of the fundamental human rights. The right to life also includes the right to a life with dignity, which obviously is underscored where there is life in poverty. This is the SDG goal number 1, essentially. It acknowledges that poverty is not merely an economic issue, but a profound violation of human rights and human dignity. It inspires a collective vision of a world where every individual, regardless of their background or circumstances, can access basic necessities for life. And this is something that will be expanded on further by the guests that we have with us today. However, before I give a short introduction of our guests, I would please like to call upon President IPRI to deliver his opening remarks. President IPRI is Muhammad Ambassador Raza Saab. Sir, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Mariam. And I must appreciate Ms. Maham and Mariam and the team for organizing this webinar today. I think it's a issue of prime importance for all the human beings in the whole of the world, I would say. And unfortunately, because of the COVID and now because of the various conflicts in the world, the element of poverty is increasing. Although it becomes a global responsibilities, and as Mariam very aptly highlighted, that it is goal number 1 of the SDGs, eradication of the poverty in the world. But is the world doing enough to actually eradicate poverty? I think one bomb, one missile, one drone strike can feed whole village. The amount which is spent on, let's say, a drone which flies from various places in the world is controlled from somewhere in United States and goes and hits somewhere in remote areas of South, it will actually cost so much that you can feed perhaps whole village in a country for not a day, but maybe month or months. So these are a few things which we must take care of. And when we come to Pakistan, we need to do a lot on it. During the COVID, our government did try to actually fight this problem and to kind of mitigate it through various measures. But post that, we are suffering through economic downturn to the extent that prices of the commodities have risen. The income is not corresponding to the inflation which came to the country. So these are certain areas where our governments need to look into. And in Pakistan, I think the greatest strength is the philanthropy. You see people here and there feeding millions in a day in Pakistan. So somewhere you have the shelter homes for keeping these people. But more than that, it is important that instead of providing them food and shelter, we should give them the jobs so that they can earn and stand on their feet with dignity, because poverty is, I won't say curse, but it is such a problem that your dignity is compromised. your health is compromised. When we talk of the human security, this is my last point I would like to say, is our new national policy. New national policy gives precedence to the human security. And if you want the human to be secure, the first thing which comes into it is their physical security and food and living. So this is an area where we need to give great concentration, look into it with great concentration, give it more importance, and find out the ways. I am honored to welcome the speakers which are going to join us today. I can see Ms. Manail is already there, and I don't know whether Mr. Atif Zishan is online or no. Dr. Anil Salman is already here. He is Chair Economy. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And back to you, Mariam. A very well organized event. And thanks to you and also Maham, great appreciation. So back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Atif Zishan is having a little trouble at the moment, so we are going to start with our second speaker, that would be Dr. Anil Salman, who is Chair Economy here at Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Sir, if I may direct the conversation to a certain direction, in a sort of explanatory and introductory way, what are the key structural factors that contribute to poverty in the global south, and what mechanisms for alleviation suit an economy like this, like ours, or the stereotypical global south economy?
Thank you, Maham. Mariam, sorry. Well, before I delve into the question that you have just posed, I would like to see that poverty has been in Pakistan and globally in two phases. One is the pre-COVID and another one is the post-COVID. And what we usually chant about the global efforts, that how we have reduced the poverty, and this is, I'm talking about 2019. Even if you look at the data over there, if you subtract the efforts done by China, we would see that our poverty levels have increased, they have not decreased. And that connects with your question, that what are actually the structural issues. So I'll be talking about 2-3 points that I think that in the poverty literature that is important when we are now studying this issue of poverty and we are celebrating this day. First of all, in the Sustainable Development Goals, that is also highlighted that we need to end the poverty and the hunger. And if you look at the overall performance of the SDGs, the recent report that came like 2 months back, all the countries, they are deviating from these SDGs. So particularly when you look at that whether we are successful in terms of reducing poverty, the answer is no. Number 2 dimension is that what we tend to do, that when we are looking at poverty, we have a very narrow view. And mostly what Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee have been talking about in their book, In Poor Economics, what they say is that when we are looking at poverty, we feel that poor is basically lacking this ability to feed themselves. So poverty and hunger have a very strong and direct correlation. But as the literature has evolved, what we have realized by different cross-sectional and the country data, that it's not true. It's not about that if we are feeding the people, the issue of poverty has been resolved. It's much more complex than that. To simplify the situation, what we have done is that we have taken a very general definition by the World Bank that, okay, people who are earning less than 2.15, the recent poverty line dollar rate, they are poor. But then there are other indices also, like we have this multi-dimensional poverty index, which recently, over the past few governments, like in Pakistan, we have calculated this MPI. So the definition is not just that you are earning less than 2.15. The definition is not just that, okay, poverty is related to hunger, but it's much more complex and it's a multi-dimensional process. And I'll take you back to a time when a movie came, Slumdog Millionaire. And that was an eye-opener for the developing countries as well as the developed world, that the developed world was so much fascinated that how poverty looks like, as if they had never seen the real face of poverty when the streets of Mumbai were shown over there, the slums of India were shown. And there was a remarkable increase in these poverty tourism, that people from the West would come to to the South to look at the countries at how poverty looks like. And we term this as the poverty porn or the poverty tourism. Later on, when we look at the different dimensions, which I think which needs to be incorporated when we are looking at poverty, rather than just developing a direct relationship with the hunger, it's the poverty of environment, it's the poverty of children, it's the poverty of opportunities, it's the poverty of voice. So there are so many facets which are included in poverty. I may be very much well-fed, but my state of health is very bad. So I am poor in terms of health. The third part that they talk about, that there's another dimension when we are measuring poverty, and that is basically when you are looking at the calorie intake. And that is also a very remarkable study by Duflo, and where she says that in reality, when we look at the calorie intake, particularly when they are looking at the states of India, they say that the calorie intake of the present labor force, that has reduced, that has not increased. And what they're trying to establish is that there is a very, it may be a relationship, but it is not a very strong relationship when we say that hunger and poverty are related. What they say that earlier, and how they decipher this concept of poverty and hunger, that earlier more calories were required because the nature of work, what people were doing, that was more of a manual. But now when we are looking at the nature of work, that you're sitting in front of the computer, the calorie intake or the kind of work that we are doing at the moment, the physical input is not required much of it. And this is true for most of the countries. So just saying that if you are giving the money for the food and it reduces the poverty, that may be successful in some of the projects, but not true in all of it. Lastly, another dimension that I wanted to share was that this is basically that after COVID-19, we see that there has been a drastic increase in the poverty, and there was an addition of 70 million people globally. But what fascinates me, the concept of the new poor. And whenever we are talking about the poor, number one observation that we see is that these people mostly live in the rural areas. They are mostly associated with this profession of agriculture. And number three, they are less educated. But what World Bank came, and they have initiated this concept of the shared prosperity. What they talk about, that this new poor is a next 20% addition in the already existing poor, but the characteristics of this new poor is very different. And that is very true when I look at the poverty landscape in Pakistan. The first one is that many of these new poor are likely to live in the congested urban settings and to work in the sectors most affected. And I'm talking about the COVID, they were affected by the lockdowns and the mobility restrictions. And most of these people were like engaged in the informal services. So that's absolutely the notion change that these people are living in the rural areas. Now the new poor is in the congested urban settings. The second one is that most of these people, the new poor, they are most likely to work in the non-agriculture sector. They are engaged in manufacturing, they're engaged in service, commerce sector. And the lastly, the new poor, they tend to be more educated and than the existing. And this is what we can see even with reference to Pakistan. If you look at the literacy rate and if you look at how the people in Pakistan, how much they're engaged in the labor force and what is the level of education. There's a study by SDPI which talks about the people who are more, who are high school dropouts, like having a under metric education, they are more likely to get job as compared to people who are having a PhD. So the more you are going higher in the academic strata, the more you are having the educational opportunities, or the more you are having these scholarships and you're coming up with these higher degrees, the probability is that you're not going to be employed in Pakistan. And we have seen the surge of people leaving the country. But again, that is not an anomaly, that is very much natural, because if you look at the last 10 years data and you see the contribution of these three sectors, that is the agriculture, industry, and your services, the services is around 52%. And I'm talking about the averages. So agriculture is around 22%, and rest is the manufacturing. For the last 10 years, and I'm talking from 2022, move back to the last 10 years, you would see there has been none of the changes in that composition. So the agriculture remains the same, industry remains the same, the services remain the same. So where that labor force is going on, the productivities and the GDP is the same. So therefore, if you are having the human capital and if you're giving them more and more education, they are getting less employed and they're leaving the country. So therefore, we see the inertness in these sectors in Pakistan. So therefore, we need a very multi-dimensional, rather a multi-pronged strategy when we are dealing with this issue of poverty. And just creating a linear relationship that they don't have money, they don't have the job, they don't have food, and that will solve the issue of poverty. I think it is not going to solve the issue of poverty. How to address these structural issues? I think you need, as Amartya Sen would say, that it is basically an ecosystem of opportunities looking at the capabilities of people. So if someone is a good engineer, he or she needs to have that kind of opportunity where they can utilize that skill. So one of the problems in, particularly with reference to Pakistan also, that we do not have the right people at the right places. And that further like worsens the situation of poverty. And this would be in the poverty of skills. We do not have the right kind of calorie intake, and you can see the amount of people going in the enrolled or going in the hospitals as compared to people in the developed economies. So therefore, if you look at the medical bills in the developing countries, the medical bills are much more higher as compared to the developed economies, not because we have the greater incidence of diseases, but it's more of that we do not offer or the right kind of food to these people. They do not have the true food. If you look at the spending pattern of the poor, and this is general, I'm talking about South Asia, and there has been experimental designs where people have been given cash for the consumption of food. People consumed the same amount of calories before they were having that cash. So we don't see much of the remarkable change in terms of the calorie intake when we are giving them those cash subsidies. And you would see that they tend to have expensive food, which may have less calories. They tend to spend it on mobile phones. They tend to spend it on clothing rather than on food, which has a direct relationship with their labor productivity. Now, it has nothing to do with that people don't know that if they are not healthy, they are not productive, and they're not giving the right kind of inputs at the job which are required by them. And then we say that, okay, the people are fired. So it's a complex issue when we are looking at poverty. Lastly, whenever we are developing the projects, whenever we are coming up with these initiatives, what we tend to forget, or what we try to have this opinion that it's like a magical stick that you have brought, you have intervened, or you have given something to the community, and in just a matter of days or in a matter of weeks, that poverty program is going to start showing us the results. So in the donor programs, I think one of the biggest issues is more or less like a checklist where we are just saying that, okay, this much amount of money was spent through SARS program or through different, and now we see that we have reduced the number of poverty. So the problem is again in the measurement, and the problem is again in the terms of the impact, that what kind of impact we are trying to get when we are doing any intervention. We have a very linear kind of understanding that you give the cash subsidy and you see people are out of the poverty traps, and it's not that simple. We have examples where countries have gotten out of these poverty traps, and again I'll quote China as one of the examples where they have pulled people out of the poverty. But that was the rapid industrialization. That was basically the people are engaged in the agriculture. It was not just that they were talking about one sector. And first they developed few of their states, and then they started looking at other provinces, that how we can develop the other provinces. So therefore, in order to get out of these poverty traps, or in order to make people well off, I think we need to look at a broader picture where suitable ecosystems have to be developed, where people can work as per their capacities and capabilities. And otherwise, what at the moment we see that the inflation has reached double digit. It has never been like that. But apart from inflation, if you look at the trend between inflation and the food inflation, the food inflation is much more higher. And when you're looking at the food inflation, it has already been a double digit, and approximately on average, a Pakistani spends 60% of its income on the is making on the food expenditures. So food inflation is much more higher. So when you are spending more on the food, how you can see that the capabilities, or how you can see that the skills of the people are going to be enhanced. And we have seen programs where they have failed, that, okay, you're giving the money for education, people have their own priorities. So for like in Pakistan, like this issue of stunting, the children's health, that is still a very major issue. And with all these advancements, all these 76 years of development, we are unable to address that problem. Children in Tharparkar, Mithi are still dying. So the government, when now looking at not looking at the philanthropy or looking at the private sector, I'm talking about the government, that when government is looking at the budgets, we can see that how much scant amount of budget is being allocated for health and education. And if these budgets are reiterated, and they are allocated in a better way, I think most of the problems can be solved when we are looking at the issue of poverty. Mariam, that's all from my side.
Thank you so much, sir. And also thank you for answering the question in such a detailed manner so as to give sufficient background to our discussion today. We are finally joined by Mr. Atif Zishan Rauf, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Rural Support Programs Network Office, which is the RSPN. Sir, could you shed light on the topic as well? And I will also have a few questions to pose towards you once you are done, sir.
Atif is a smart professional. He has the right answers to all the questions which you will pose.
I agree to most of the points. Thank you very much for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good to see Anil again. It's wonderful to see you. I agree with most of the points raised by Anil, and it's really, these are all pressing issues we have to look into. As far as RSPs are concerned, I would say that we have done few projects, more than few projects, where we have taken poor out of the poverty trap, and these are significant numbers. But at the same time, once the project finishes, once the project concludes, that is the challenging portion, or that is the challenging part for us. Now, I can quote examples, and that's I mean, these are quite important percentages. For example, if I see in one of the projects we implemented in Malakand Division, 7 districts of Malakand Division through EU, we were able to reduce 40% of the poverty, or the target beneficiaries moved from 0 to 23. And poverty, it's like we simply calculate the poverty based on the poverty scorecard introduced by the World Bank. There are a number of other aspects as well to the poverty, but we are using the poverty scorecard. So initially we do the poverty scorecard at the baseline stage, and then midline, and then endline as well. In case of European Union Programme for Economic Advancement and Community Empowerment, this was a 4 years project, which was extended for the next 2 years as well. In 6 years, we were able to work with 12,000 community-based organizations covering almost 250,000 population. Now, 40% of these poor moved out of the poverty trap. But what happened once the project concluded? That is the challenging question. We are looking at some kind of enabling environment which is not there. So once the project is finished, then these local communities, they tend to go back to their subsistence practices. For example, I would quote few examples here. We engaged some of these farmers in introducing or adopting or probably developing some value chains. But once we were out of this particular area, they started cultivating potatoes again, which was a common practice, because they the common trend in Pakistan, which I see is quite ironic. Once the external I would say support is not there, then they tend to go back to their subsistence practices. Now, then I'll quote some more examples. In case of Balochistan, which is quite tough area, we were working in 10 districts of Balochistan through a BRACE program, which was Balochistan Rural Advancement and Community Empowerment Project. We were able to take 16% of the population out of the poverty. But then again, like Salman mentioned, the economic factors, the socioeconomic factors, the political economy, and the number of other factors. Again, these people are back into the poverty. An interesting fact is we were implementing a very large scale project in 10 districts of Sindh. Dr. Tariq Hussain conducted a very comprehensive study. He's a renowned economist. You know him very well. As per his figures, 40% of the people moved out of the poverty. But the moment this program concluded in 2022, we received floods, and those 40% who moved out of the poverty were back into the poverty again. So it's not only the natural disasters are contributing to it. Apart from that, I would say that lack of an enabling environment, lack of the interest of private and public sector, and many other donors and key stakeholders. I would agree with Salman again that it's not a matter of few days, or it's not a magic wand that you will, or it's not a silver bullet that is remedial for everything. You need to have at least at least 10 to 12 years of continuous working relationship with these communities, develop models of economic, development, economic growth. For example, I would say in northern areas, we have introduced these micro hydro projects. These micro hydro projects has set up everything. I mean, electricity is there. People have communication with the outside world. Then they have established these businesses. And then the private sector has also been introduced into these areas where the people, they have started participating in some kind of economic activities. Until and unless you introduce these economic activities, progressive economic activities, which has long-term impact, I don't think so that it will be possible to reduce poverty. In our case, we have demonstrated in more than 10, 12 mega projects where we have demonstrated that people can be taken out of the poverty. But once these projects conclude, that is the biggest question. So what my suggestion is that there should be a long-term relationship. One, the key stakeholders should always be there. It should not be just one kind of a support and then they are off. The As far as the RSPs are concerned, we go with a process approach, not with a project approach, and that is where you can see us throughout Pakistan. If you see our presence is in 152 out of 155 districts. And that is just because of the reason that we developed this long-term relationship with the communities. I would suggest and I would request the key stakeholders and the government agencies to be establishing a similar kind of relationship with these people. Until and unless you do, you don't do that, you cannot take out this population out of the poverty. And the other important thing is, now I'm coming to a very specific point, which is like engaging women in all these processes. Until and unless you involve and engage women in these productive, in these economic activities, forget about the poverty eradication. Because if you are considering and if you are concentrating only on men, it's virtually impossible. Again, Salman mentioned about inflation, the current level of inflation. It is impossible for salaried class like us to maintain our status quo and maintain the kind of facilities that we are having. And looking at the rural communities, it is impossible for them. Day by day, it's very difficult for them to survive. So one, engaging men and engaging women as well. Apart from that, introducing new technologies, mainstreaming them into development activities. Socioeconomic growth, socioeconomic activities are always preferred. I would also go back to the agriculture development. For example, in some of the areas, we have developed the agriculture system, and this agriculture system, I conducted a study and I can share that paper with you. From 4 cusick to 7 cusick, the water was increased and level of water. And then the farmers at the tail end were getting regular water. The land was appreciated. They introduced double cropping pattern, etc., etc., etc. So, these are kind of things that we can demonstrate. The organization like I can see a Huat here as well. I can see an RSP, I can see a RSPN or partner RSPs. We can demonstrate these kind of things. But we need, I would say, the government support to take it to scale. Until and unless you don't have this kind of support from the government, from the key stakeholders, it is impossible for organizations like us to take that on a scale or at a scale. Otherwise, we have demonstrated it. There are models where we have proved that you can take them out of poverty. I can also quote one more example. We have established women village banks, and these women village banks are exceptional. In some of the areas, their average income was increased by more than 500%, and that was amazing. But in some areas, it was not that significant. The reason is that the setting of these women village banks was also very important. In some of these areas where there were business activities, where it was an economic hub, these women village banks were exceptional. But in some of these areas where these women village banks were off the track, off the road, they were not in main areas, it was impossible for these women village banks to sustain. So there are a number of factors which can be considered. But my point is that RSPN and partner RSPs, we have produced some models, we have shown you, we have different poverty graduation models. We have implemented those, and it is the time to reconsider these models, these practices, and then it can be taken up by the government. And then if you want to reduce poverty, you can do that. But if you don't have a bigger support of the donors specifically and the key stakeholders, and from key stakeholders, I specifically mean the public institution. If you don't have the support of public institution, and then we go back again to zero again. So it's like my simple suggestion would be, yes, we can demonstrate it. And if we have support, we can show you that how to take these people out of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I have one question for you, which is essentially, there exist successful examples of poverty eradication programs. Matlab Pakistan, maybe we have Benazir Income Support, we have Sehat Card. But if we look a little broader within our region, is there anything else and anyone else that we can learn from in terms of successful interventions and other programs of the sort?
I mean, there are many other examples in Bangladesh and India. There are so many examples. We can learn from them and we can implement that. Some of these models we have learned from Bangladesh and from our neighboring country, the other neighboring country. Well, we came back and we introduced some of these practices in these programs that I mentioned, and we were able to take these people out of poverty. But again, it comes back to the same thing that, you know, how receptive is the government to all these ideas. In 40 Union Council, I gave you an example. In KP, one of the programs was implemented through the government, the public institution. In 40 Union Council, we were able, in just 3 years, we were able to take about 42% of the people out of poverty. Next, in the next cycle, you know, the next government, they did not entertain that particular initiative at all. The reason was that, and I'll be very, very open about it. The reason was that when you talk about community involvement, you are talking about, you know, you are kind of, you know, taking a big clash with some of these big contractors in the area. So if we are engaging communities and through community participation, you are implementing all these infrastructure schemes. If you are engaging community and doing these things quite economically, then the contractors, and I'm sorry to mention this, all your contractors are in your provincial and national assemblies. So they are the biggest hurdle. Once we presented these models to them, and then it was, you know, the provincial assembly and the provincial cabinet did not approve that particular project for the next cycle. So what I say is that, yes, there are very good examples across the border. We have learned from them and we have implemented it successfully. But when it comes to taking it to scale, then you feel big hurdles around.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to our final speaker, Ms. Mishal Shah, who is a program manager at Akhuwat. Mishal, would you like to share your thoughts on the broader topic?
Thank you for having me, Mariam. So I would like to echo a lot of the things that Dr. Salman and Atif were saying. You know, seeing the work that Akhuwat has been doing since 2001, I think Dr. Salman initially mentioned that when we talk about poverty, there are multiple forms, right? So there is the poverty of opportunities, there is poverty of access to health, access to education. So one of the things that our founder, Dr. Abdul Saqib, you know, he used to say a lot, especially when I joined Akhuwat, was that poverty in its worst form is the poverty of hope. So it's these people not having the hope that things will get better, that they will have the opportunity to get the access to, you know, to food, to shelter, to education, and be able to actually climb out of, you know, what we see in Pakistan, which is intergenerational poverty, and how that is something that is so common. So when, you know, personally speaking from Akhuwat's lens, when we try to solve this problem, of course, we can't eradicate it altogether as much as we want to. But what we did realize was that the first step was actually going onto the ground and talking to the people and actually realizing or asking them what do they need. So rather than us sitting in our offices and deciding that, this intervention will be ideal for them, it has to be a community-driven approach. It has to be an approach which is a bottom-up approach. So it has to be a participatory development. That's what it is essentially, and that's how we started. So and in our work, as we started as a microfinance program, and alhamdulillah, today we're the world's largest interest-free microfinance organization. We've helped over 6 million families all across Pakistan. And the one thing that we realized is that, a lot of the times we had critics, especially when Akhuat was starting, who would say that this model is not going to work. But I think Akhuat's success is really, reinstates the fact that you can trust the poor. It's not that you are going to give them a skill or you are going to give them a loan and they're going to run away with it, or they're not going to repay it back. You can trust them enough to know that this is something that they need, and you form a partnership with them and you form a bond of brotherhood with them. And that is the philosophy on which Akhuat stands today. So, we have a repayment rate of 99.9%. And that is something that shocks a lot of people, a lot of economists specifically, because it's a model that is not so much by the book, but it works because of the method that we have formed. So when we give out our loans, which are microfinance, small interest-free loans, we give them out in groups, right? So there are a group of 3 to 5 people who come and they need a loan and they get that loan. And then we disperse them in oftentimes religious spaces. So in mosques, in churches, in temples. So in Sindh, for example, Akhuat is known as Bhagwan Bank. So it is kind of really not only just trusting the poor for us, but also giving them that assurity that we are here to support you. We are not here to just give you charity. So we are kind of standing on a level ground with them. So I think that completely changes the entire story or the entire narrative of when you're trying to solve an issue as complex as poverty. And then also understanding that we do believe that financial inclusion is one of the biggest hurdles to climbing out of poverty, right? So especially when Atisha was talking about women, what percentage of women in Pakistan have a bank account? Last I checked, it was less than 10%. So, that is something that is astounding. So until you actually give them that opportunity or that access to be able to be financially included members of the society, how do you expect them to be able to go pursue jobs or to, or you want them to let their children go to school or, spend money on any of the things that we think are necessities. So that is the approach that we've taken. It is, of course, a long-term development intervention, but it aims to solve poverty on multiple levels. And the biggest of them is, we believe that it's intergenerational poverty. So when we have people come to us and they ask for loans anywhere between 10,000 and 80,000 rupees, they start small businesses. So they will start a stitching business. So the first woman who came to us for a loan, that's how she started in 2001. या वो फल की रेडी लगाएंगे या सब्जी की रेडी लगाएंगे या वो साइकिल शॉप लगाएंगे. And when we've actually gone and spoken to these people and we ask them, how has the food changed your life or how has this helped you? They will often say that, upar Allah te niche food. This is their way of saying that this is the help that we needed. It is not that they needed a grant and that was going to help them, but then they come back again for a loan when they want to expand their business further. So we're really trying to encourage people to form sustainable pathways out of poverty. It shouldn't be just a one-time approach that this is something that we've done and then we step out of it. Similarly, when the floods came, we worked very actively on the rehabilitation of these people. So we gave them loans and sometimes grants if they were not financially empowered enough to build their houses. And they were able to do that in a very small cost because the labor that they were using were themselves and their families, right? So the lens, I think, that we oftentimes, when we are sitting and talking about poverty, we're coming from a very biased lens. We're not really understanding what the problem on the ground is. And that's why even the approaches that we come up with remain somewhat kind of disassociated with what is the need of the hour. So those would be my 2 cents. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Oh, okay. I do actually have questions. One would come out of your point of trusting the poor and actually professionally holding the opinion that they are capable enough to decide what their biggest problems are, and for us to pose community-based solutions and interventions rather than deciding what we think is fit. So how can we ensure that economic growth in the global south is inclusive and benefits the most vulnerable populations, do you think? How do we go on to actually enforce that and be very cognizant of that in our interventions?
I think the first step in doing that would be doing a needs assessment, right? So whenever and whatever project you are planning, or whatever intervention that you are planning, you need to go on the field. So for example, if I have chosen a certain village that I'm going to do an intervention in, I will need to go and assess what is the need of that village. So for example, in Kasur, we adopted 7 villages, a couple of years ago. And while we were sitting and discussing what would be ideal, we talked about education and we talked about health. When we went and asked the people what they wanted, they wanted bathrooms, and they needed washrooms to be built because they didn't have them. And they wanted a proper wastage disposal mechanism to be in place. So I think that's the easiest way to go about it, which is oftentimes, I think, not talked about, because we talk about having, there's such a complex problem needs to have a very complex solution as well. But it's quite simple that you actually go in the field and you ask the people, what do you need? So right now we've adopted a town in Kasur, it's called Mustafabad, and we've adopted 1,000 households. So we've put the Sustainable Development Goals as a benchmark, and we are doing interventions in all of these SDGs. So, we've made vocational training centers for women, we've made an IT center for women over there. We're doing a lot of work on sanitation, but we are working with the community. So we've formed community organizations with that's 20 to 25 people. And then our field staff actually goes and holds regular meetings with those people. And we tell them that, okay, we're going to do this together. We're going to make your town into a model town together. So it's not that Akhwat is coming in and Akhwat is going to do all of this for us, and then Akhwat is going to leave. But it's actually going in on the field and teaching them that this is how it's done. So let's say 10 years from now or 5 years from now, when Akhwat takes a step back, or any organization for that matter, they know how to carry that forward, right? You're not just leaving them stranded. So it's passing on that knowledge as well. And as I initially talked about, forming a sustainable pathway out of poverty, that's what we're essentially trying to do. And we're working in collaboration, not only with, the government and private organizations and, donors, because of whom we're able to do all that we are doing, but also working, with the poor as our key stakeholders and intervention.
Perfect.
Can I just add to it?
Yes, sir, sure.
Okay, so the thing is that organizations like Akhwat or RSPs, what Mishal was saying and mentioning, that we have these community-based organizations. So they would generally be comprising 20, 25 members. To make them inclusive, what we do is we, as I mentioned, we have these poverty scorecards as well. But then in addition to that, we also have the participatory poverty assessment of that area. Now, once we do that, we make sure that in these CBOs or in these community-based organization, village organization, or the local support organization, all these poor should be member of these community-based organizations, right? Now, if you see our composition, if I tell you our outreach, it's like we have formed 5.25 million CBOs. And out of these, we are covering about 80 million population. Out of this 80 million, I can confidently say that 50% of all these 80 million are essentially poor. So essentially, we are covering 100% of the poor in the area. But generally, if you see the broader figures, we are almost covering, the 50% of the population. So the thing is that to make it inclusive and to ensure that poor and the The vulnerable population is part of it. We do all these assessments, and then we make sure that community take them on board. They are part of each and every activity, whether it is microfinance, whether it is engineering, whether it is microhydros, whether it is natural resource management, whether it is health, education, whatever the intervention be. So that is a general approach of organization like RSPs, RSPN, or AFUA. So we adopt this kind of approach, and that is how we ensure their inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. The floor is now open for questions. If anybody has questions, please drop them in the chat box of the meeting. I will also take this opportunity to quickly ask a question. Dr. Salman, if you could please receive this question. So the concept or the practice of informal economies is very prevalent in the global south. What strategies can we implement to formalize and support these economies while also reducing poverty in the process?
As you talk about the informal economies, am I right?
Yes, sir.
And what are we going to do with these informal economies?
So the question was, since informal economies are so prevalent in the global south, what strategies can be implemented to formalize and support these economies in an attempt to also reduce poverty?
You see, I always ask a counter question: why do we need to formalize them? Either they should start paying taxes or not. Usually, in the economic literature, why do we need formalizing? Because we want them to come into the tax net. I'm coming it from the public policy perspective. But you see what has happened in the recent past in Pakistan. It was the informal sector that actually saved us, like just one theory that saved us from these defaults, the debt default that we were going to have, because there was de-dollarization, there was de-formalization, and there was de-banking. Because once everything is structured, that you become more vulnerable. But due to this informal sector, I think the better question is that how to map the informal sector, that how much it is contributing in your GDP. And unfortunately, in Pakistan, we do not have much of the relevant studies where we can talk about that. Okay, this is the informal footprint in Pakistan, and this is how it is helping the country. Number two, that how to make them formal. I think one of the reasons that why they are called as the informal sector, because we are unable to document it. So the challenge is that how to make the documentation easy. Pakistan is one of the only countries which even yesterday we were having a debate that where you have legitimized the non-taxpayers, where you have already established a category that we have filers and non-filers. And if you are a non-filer, these are the things that you have to do. Instead of saying that in Pakistan, everyone has to be a taxpayer, that is what every country is doing. Scandinavian economies, if you look at the US or the European economies, everyone is a taxpayer. So when we are looking at the informal sector, the challenge is how to make them understand that whatever is happening in the economy, that is not going to hurt them. Because one of the reasons that why informal sector prospers, because there are less checks and balances. And if the government footprint, like if you want to establish any business entity in Pakistan, I think you need 20 to 35 NOCs to get that project done. Now, do you think our entrepreneur, and I'm talking about the MSMEs, do they have an appetite to go for these 20 to 35 NOCs? They don't. So they start without asking and saying that, okay, we never knew, and later on they will say. When you give an option in Pakistan that, okay, do you want to be a filer or a non-filer? They would say, we prefer to be a non-filer. So the real task for informal sector is it's not bad, but how you bring them on board where they are comfortable to declare what's there. Because I think apart from bringing them in the net, what I would say is that how to like the defining point would be that how do you define an informal sector, because that is also a pretty that itself is also an issue that has not been resolved. Because as I said, for me, formal informal is that the informal sector is not a detachment, but that is not the case. So there are more things to it. And if you want to have the informal sector, I think you need to make the system friendly. You need to make it as one click where everyone feels comfortable. And one of the things would be reducing the tax rate, increasing space, reducing the tax exemption. So that actually formalizes your informal sector to the formal sector.
Thank you so much. The person with their hand raised, can we please mute your account? There's a lot of noise on the line from this end. Thank you. We have another question which asks, do the four different seasons and their severity influence and or induce poverty throughout the country, or what impact the severity of seasonal changes has on poverty? Sitab or Vishal, whoever would like to take this question.
I would respond to that, and I would quote an example. We were talking to the people in northern areas. You know, there's a harsh season there. So if specifically you're talking to the farmers, there is a lean period between harvest and then the planting. And during this particular season, the farmers they don't have an income at all. Now this really impacts them, and it goes around. You know, it is true and relevant for all the farmers in Pakistan. So yes, there are challenges regarding different seasons, but then you can take some good steps. For example, with AKRSP, they've started introducing some hybrid seeds from China, which has a different period, so it is resilient seed as well. I mean, there are steps. There could be multiple steps which can be taken to address these. But otherwise, yes, I agree with this. Yeah, with the question that seasons and these patterns or these harsh weathers, they definitely have an impact, and it impacts the poor people more than us, because we have a cushion, we have some mechanism to survive. But otherwise, if you look at them, then it is quite difficult for these people. So I agree with it.
Mariam, you have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Thank you, sir. We're taking one last question, and this is about data collection. So data collection and analysis are crucial for designing effective poverty eradication programs and other interventions in the public sector. How can we improve data gathering, monitor progress more effectively in the global south? Because database solutions are essentially the key to any intervention. How can we improve these processes than we already have currently?
Can I respond to that?
Yes, sir.
My response is that, you know, it's like we have to sensitize a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders.
जी बेटा आपकी आवाज आ रही है, आप बंद कर दो माइक को।
Okay, so so my point is that it's a kind of ironic thing. I've been working in monitoring and evaluation for quite some time. Now, when you look at the criticalness, or you look at the important this particular sector is quite important, where you have to document, you have to gather information, you have to generate data. Many a times we don't pay these professionals at all. So when you go to the field, it's a kind of it's considered as a petty job. I believe that we should be, everybody should be sensitized about it. These data gathering professionals, these monitoring and evaluation professionals, people who are producing wonderful data on which these policies and programs can be designed, they should be really well paid. Their contribution should be acknowledged. Many a times, if you go to the field level, if I quote my example, monitoring and evaluation officer, basically at RSPs, they get very nominal kind of a package, which is not as per their professional capability. Most of the donors and most of the key stakeholders or partners, they're not aware of that, or they are, even if they are aware, then they are talking about cost of doing business, the value for money. So they would like to be on more cost effective side. I see that we need to invest, we need to offer better packages to all these professionals who are gathering data, who is conducting research. And in addition to this, organization like your organization, the Islamabad Policy Research Institute, STPI, and many other organizations who are doing this wonderful job, they should be acknowledged. Their level of effort should be acknowledged. They should be provided more funds to gather. There are two sets of data. One data set is produced by the government agencies, which is always dubious, and then there's a data set which is produced by independent organization like yours. So I believe that there should always be organizations who are collecting data. They should gather all these facts and figures. I was attending a meeting last time, and the government was presenting some very fancy figures, while the World Food Program was totally against it. They said that our based on our analysis, the data what you are mentioning or what you are presenting is totally different to what we have gathered. So it's like, instead of biased data, what we can do is that we once one we should be supporting organization like you, SDPI, and many other organizations to produce wonderful data. And then we should also develop the capacities of the professionals. And then third, I would say that we should be offering some better packages to these wonderful professionals who are always going to the field and producing data. And based on this data, only then we are able to develop these policies, procedures. And if you ask me critically, there is a lack of data in Pakistan. So we need to address this particular issue as well.
Exactly. We hear a lot of public professionals talking about the lack of evidence-based solutions, which obviously comes from the evidence and the data that we significantly lack. Going to now wrap up our webinar. And before I do so, I would like for Ms. Maham Naveed, who is the chair of Lawfare and International Law at IPRI, to please deliver her closing remarks. Maham, whenever you're ready. Maham?
Mom, I think you have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
I think you have to give permission to your mic. No.
You're still not audible.
We can hear you, but your voice is coming from a far distance.
That's because her Maham's office is right next to mine, and I can hear her, but nobody else can.
She should switch to your computer then.
Um,
Hello, everyone. So I just borrowed Miriam's laptop. So I will sum up with highlighting the importance of the Poverty Eradication Day observed by the UN. The observation of this day can be traced back to 1980s when over 100 people gathered together in Paris at the same place that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed in 1948. The idea was to honor the victims of extreme poverty, violence, and hunger. And we see how poverty was put in tandem with violence as seen as a systematic violence against people. So these people proclaimed that poverty is a violation of human rights and affirmed the need to come together to ensure that these rights were respected. From an international law perspective, since that's my area of expertise, eliminating poverty and promoting human rights are interrelated objectives mentioned in a number of international treaties and commitments, including, as Lord Speaker spoke about, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Thus, in international law, the goal of poverty eradication is achieved through the application of multiple human rights treaties and conventions, including the Charter of the United Nations. So it's seen that living above the poverty line is basically a fundamental human right that needs to be guaranteed to all individuals. Over the years and decades, states have taken steps individually and through international assistance and cooperation to eradicate poverty and work towards financial inclusion globally. However, considering that according to the World Bank, 719 million people still fall below the poverty line is alarming and more needs to be done. That is very clear. I will leave you with that thought and would like to thank all the speakers for taking out time and enlightening us with their views and sharing their own personal experiences and expertise in the matter. We hope to see you all in our future webinars, and thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Neil. Thank you, Arif Saab. Thank you, Mishal.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you. It was lovely talking to you all.
Same here.
Thank you, Arif. Good seeing you.
Yeah, I'll see you soon.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.